The crowd gathered in front of Parsons' general store parted like the Red Sea as Zara Mitchell stumbled through, tears streaming down her face, the letter from the army clutched in her trembling hand. April 1875 had brought nothing but heartache to the small town of Silver Creek, Colorado, and now it seemed determined to break her too. "Look at her, crying like a child," someone whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Always was too soft for frontier life." Another voice joined in. "Tears won't bring your pa back, girl. Buck up or pack up." Zara kept walking, head down, trying to block out the cruel words as she made her way through town. The death notice had arrived that morning. Her father, the only family she had left, killed in a skirmish with raiders while serving as a scout for the army. Now she was truly alone, with a struggling farm and mounting debts. "Folks ain't wrong, you know," called out Silas Warren, the banker who'd been pressuring her to sell her father's land for months. "Crying won't pay your debts." The crowd's laughter hit her like physical blows. Zara stopped in her tracks, unable to move forward as her grief overwhelmed her. A tall figure stepped from the shadows of the livery stable. Xander Blackett stood 6'3", broad-shouldered in his dusty canvas coat, his face partially hidden beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Everyone knew the quiet cowboy who'd ridden into town 6 months ago and taken work at the Henderson Ranch. Few had heard him speak more than a handful of words at a time. "You find her tears amusing?" His voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. Silas Warren straightened his vest. "Just speaking truth, Blackett. This ain't a place for the weak." Xander stepped forward until he stood beside Zara. Without a word, he removed his hat and placed it over his heart. A single tear tracked down his weathered cheek, catching the sunlight as it fell. "Then I'll cry with her," he said simply. "Any man worth his salt would." The crowd fell silent. Zara looked up at the stranger beside her, astonished to find this rugged cowboy shedding tears on her behalf. "Your father was a good man," Xander said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet street. "He saved my life 2 years ago when my horse threw me in a ravine 30 miles from nowhere. Spent 3 days getting me to a doctor." He replaced his hat and offered Zara his arm. "Miss Mitchell, may I walk you home?" Stunned by this unexpected alliance, Zara took his arm. The crowd parted again, but this time with downcast eyes and shamed expressions as Xander escorted her down the dusty main street. "I didn't know you knew my father," Zara said once they were beyond earshot of the crowd. "Samuel Mitchell was one of the finest men I ever met," Xander replied. "When I heard he'd settled in these parts, I came looking for him. Arrived too late to thank him properly." He glanced at her. "But not too late to help his daughter, if she'll allow it." "Why would you help me?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Xander's blue eyes held a depth of understanding that took her breath away. "Because sometimes all we need is someone to stand beside us when the world feels too heavy to bear alone." They reached the edge of town where the dirt road stretched another mile to her farm. Zara hesitated, wiping away the remnants of her tears. "I can make it from here, Mr. Blackett. Thank you for your kindness." Xander shook his head. "I'll see you home safe, Miss Mitchell. And tomorrow I'll come by to help with whatever needs doing. Your father would expect no less of me." As they walked the dusty road to her small farm, Zara felt something shift inside her, the crushing weight of her solitude lifting ever so slightly. The cowboy beside her said little, but his presence spoke volumes. The next morning, true to his word, Xander arrived at dawn. Zara opened her door to find him already repairing her sagging front porch. "Mr. Blackett, you don't need to, Xander," he corrected without looking up from his work. "And I know I don't need to. I want to." Over the next weeks, Xander arrived each morning before heading to his job at the Henderson Ranch and returned each evening. He fixed the roof, mended fences, and helped with the spring planting. Word spread through town of the quiet cowboy's devotion to Samuel Mitchell's daughter. One evening in late May, as they sat on the newly repaired porch watching fireflies rise from the grass, Zara finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Why do you really come here every day, Xander?" He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he turned to her, the fading light catching the gold flecks in his eyes. "The first time I saw you was last November, at the Harvest Festival. You were helping old Mrs. Jenkins with her quilt stall, laughing as you showed a little girl how to stitch." His voice grew soft. "I asked your father about you that day. He said you had your mother's heart too big for your own good sometimes." Zara's breath caught. "You knew who I was that day in town?" Xander nodded. "I'd been trying to find the courage to introduce myself properly. Wasn't planning on it happening the way it did." "I'm glad it did," Zara admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. A week later, Silas Warren arrived at the farm, ledger in hand and 2 men flanking him. "Time's up, Miss Mitchell," he announced from his horse, not bothering to dismount. "Your father took out a loan last fall. Payments 3 months past due." "That's impossible," Zara protested. "My father wouldn't have." "Got his signature right here," Warren said, flipping open his ledger. "Either pay the $200 by week's end, or we'll be taking ownership." Xander emerged from the barn, pitchfork in hand. "Show me that paper." Warren hesitated, then handed the ledger down. Xander studied the signature carefully. "This isn't Samuel Mitchell's handwriting," he said finally. "I've seen enough of his letters to know." "Are you calling me a fraud?" Warren's face reddened. "I'm saying there's something wrong here," Xander replied evenly. "And I think Judge Hollister would be mighty interested to compare this with other samples of Mr. Mitchell's signature." Warren snatched back his ledger. "You're making a mistake, Blackett. No one crosses me in this town." "Seems like someone should," Xander replied, standing his ground. After Warren and his men rode off, Zara turned to Xander. "That loan document is forged. My father would have told me." "I believe you," Xander said. "But Warren's got influence. We need proof." They rode into town the next day and visited Judge Hollister, who had been a friend of Zara's father. The elderly judge examined the documents Zara had brought her father's letters, his will, the deed to the farm, and compared them with the loan agreement Warren had filed with the county. "Clear as day," the judge declared. "This signature is forged. I'll have the sheriff investigate, but in the meantime he can't touch your property, Miss Mitchell." Relief flooded through Zara, but it was short-lived. As they left the courthouse, 3 of Warren's men blocked their path. "Boss wants a word," the largest one said, reaching for Zara's arm. Xander stepped between them. "Your boss can come find us himself if he has something to say." The man threw the first punch, catching Xander on the jaw. What followed was brief but brutal. Though outnumbered, Xander fought with the controlled precision of a man who had seen his share of trouble. When it was over, 2 of Warren's men lay groaning in the dust, and the third had fled. "Are you hurt?" Zara asked, touching Xander's bruised face with gentle fingers. "I've had worse," he said, wincing slightly. "But this isn't over. Warren won't stop." He was right. The next day, Warren arrived at the farm with the sheriff. "These are serious accusations, Miss Mitchell," Sheriff Tate said, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Warren here says you and Blackett threatened him, destroyed bank property." "That's a lie," Zara protested. "We have witnesses," Warren countered smugly. The sheriff scratched his head. "Judge Hollister's orders protect your farm for now, but I'm afraid I'll need to take Blackett in for questioning." Xander stood calmly as the sheriff bound his wrists. "Check with Henderson," he told Zara. "He knows people in Denver who can help." As they led Xander away, Zara felt her world tilting again. She'd come to rely on his steady presence, his quiet strength. Without him, the farm seemed impossibly large and empty. She rode to the Henderson ranch immediately. James Henderson, a silver-haired rancher who'd been one of the first settlers in the area, listened to her story with growing anger. "Warren's been trying to buy up all the small spreads for years," he said. "Rumors are he's in league with the railroad, promising them right-of-way through our valley." He stood up from his desk. "Don't you worry about Blackett. That boy's the best hand I've had in 20 years. I won't let him rot in jail." True to his word, Henderson returned to town with Zara and 6 of his ranch hands. They found Xander in a cell, sporting a fresh bruise on his cheekbone. "Warren's men paid me a visit," he explained as Henderson arranged his release. "This has gone far enough," Henderson declared. "I'm sending for the federal marshal. There's more going on here than a forged loan document." While they waited for the marshal to arrive from Denver, tensions in Silver Creek escalated. Someone set fire to Zara's barn in the night. Only the quick action of Xander and 2 Henderson ranch hands, who'd taken to camping on her property, prevented the flames from spreading to the house. The following Sunday, Zara entered the church to whispers and stares. She held her head high as she took a seat, but her hands trembled. Moments later, Xander slid into the pew beside her, dressed in clean clothes with his hair slicked back. It was the first time she'd seen him without his hat indoors, and she was struck by how the dark waves of his hair framed his face. "You didn't have to come," she whispered. "Yes," he said simply. "I did." After the service, several women who had previously joined in the mockery approached Zara, offering hesitant words of support. Xander's unwavering presence beside her had not gone unnoticed, nor had Henderson's very public support. "The tide's turning," Xander observed as they walked home. "People respect Henderson. His backing means something." "It's not just Henderson they respect," Zara replied softly. "It's you. The way you stood up for me that day." Xander's eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them. He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. They walked the rest of the way in silence, hands linked, the connection between them growing stronger with each step. The federal marshal arrived 3 days later, a grim-faced man named Cooper who listened to their story without comment, then set about investigating with methodical precision. It took him less than a week to uncover the truth. "Warren's been running a land fraud scheme across 3 counties. He explained to Zara, Xander, Henderson, and Judge Hollister. Forging documents, intimidating owners, then selling the properties to the railroad at inflated prices. He's got 2 bank clerks and the deputy sheriff involved." "What happens now?" Zara asked. "Now they face justice," the marshal replied. "And you get to keep your farm, Miss Mitchell." The arrest sent shockwaves through Silver Creek. As summer settled over the valley, life began returning to normal. Xander continued working at the Henderson ranch, but spent every free moment helping Zara with her farm. Together, they repaired what had been damaged, planted what had been neglected. On a warm evening in July, as they sat side by side on the porch swing Xander had built, Zara realized how much her life had changed since that terrible day in April. The grief for her father was still there, a dull ache that flared at unexpected moments, but alongside it had grown something new and fragile hope. "Penny for your thoughts," Xander said, his voice a low rumble beside her. "I was thinking about how different everything is now," Zara replied. "How different I am." Xander studied her face in the fading light. "Different how?" "Stronger, I think. Less afraid." She turned to face him. "Because of you." He shook his head. "You were always strong, Zara. You just needed someone to remind you." The way he said her name made her heart flutter. Over these months, they had developed a comfortable companionship, but there remained an unspoken tension between them, a current of possibility neither had been brave enough to acknowledge. "Why did you really cry with me that day, Xander?" she asked suddenly. "The truth." His gaze didn't waver. "Because from the moment I first saw you, I knew you were someone worth standing beside, worth fighting for." He paused. "Worth loving." The word hung between them, a declaration and a question all at once. Zara felt tears spring to her eyes again. But these were different from the ones she'd shed in town that day. These were born of joy, not sorrow. "No one's going to mock these tears," she whispered, smiling through them. "If they do," Xander said, leaning closer, "I'll still cry with you, every time." Their first kiss was gentle, a tender promise exchanged in the gathering dusk. When they parted, Zara saw in Xander's eyes the future she'd feared lost forever, one filled with love and belonging. As summer turned to autumn, Xander became a permanent fixture at the Mitchell farm. He built an addition to the house, speaking of future children with a certainty that made Zara blush. The town that had once mocked her tears now watched with approval as the quiet Cowboy and Samuel Mitchell's daughter built a life together. On the first anniversary of the day Xander had stood beside her in the street, he proposed. They were in the same spot where it had all begun, outside Parsons' general store. "It seems fitting," he said, down on one knee despite the curious onlookers, "to ask you here, where I first knew I would love you for the rest of my days." Zara's yes was immediate and certain. As Xander slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, someone began to applaud. Soon the entire street joined in, cheering for the couple whose love story had begun with tears, but would continue with joy. They married in October 1876, beneath the golden canopy of changing leaves. James Henderson gave the bride away, and Judge Hollister performed the ceremony. The church overflowed with well-wishers, including many who had stood silent that day when Zara had needed defenders. "You've changed this town," Henderson told them at the reception. "Reminded folks what it means to stand up for what's right." Xander kept his arm around Zara's waist, his touch a constant reminder of his presence. "We just did what needed doing, and found each other in the process," Zara added, leaning into his embrace. That night, as they stood in the doorway of their home, now truly theirs, together Xander swept Zara into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackett," he whispered against her lips. "I've been home since the day you stood beside me," she replied. "Everything else was just waiting for you to realize it too." Their life together was not without challenges. The harsh Colorado winters tested their resilience. A drought the following summer threatened their crops. But through it all, they faced each obstacle side by side, their bond growing stronger with each trial overcome. In the spring of 1878, Zara gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Sarah, after Xander's mother. As he held his newborn daughter for the first time, tears of joy streaming down his face, Xander remembered that moment in the street when he had chosen to cry with a grieving woman rather than join those who mocked her. "Best decision I ever made," he told Zara as they marveled at their daughter's tiny fingers and perfect face. "Which one?" she asked. "Standing with you that day. Every good thing in my life came from that moment." As their daughter grew, so did their farm. Xander's natural skill with horses led them to raise stock for the army, while Zara's talent for organization turned their modest operation into one of the most successful in the county. They added a son to their family in 1880, Samuel, named for the grandfather he would never meet, but whose legacy lived on in the values his parents taught him. 5 years after they first met, Zara and Xander stood on their front porch, watching their children play in the yard that had once seemed too empty to bear. The silver band on Zara's finger caught the sunlight as she reached for her husband's hand. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked. "If you hadn't been there that day?" Xander's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her close against his side. I believe some things are meant to be, no matter what path we take to find them. He pressed a kiss to her temple. But I'm grateful every day that I found the courage to stand beside you when it mattered. You've been standing beside me ever since, Zara said softly. And I always will, Xander promised. Through tears and laughter, through whatever life brings us. As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold, Zara thought of all the tears she had shed since losing her father, tears of grief, of fear, of joy, of love. Not one of them had been wasted. Each had been a step on the journey that led her here, to this man who had taught her the true strength in vulnerability, who had shown her that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was to cry openly and without shame. I love you, Xander Blackett, she said, turning in his arms to face him. His eyes, still capable of taking her breath away after all these years, crinkled at the corners as he smiled. And I love you, Zara Blackett, every day a little more than the last. Their children's laughter filled the air around them, a joyful soundtrack to a life built from the ashes of sorrow. In a town that had once been quick to judge weakness, they had created a home where tears were understood as the natural companion to joy, neither something to be mocked nor hidden away. As twilight deepened into night, they gathered their children and moved inside, closing the door on the outside world. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and triumphs, but whatever came, they would face it together, the cowboy who had dared to cry in public and the woman whose tears had drawn him to her side. In the years that followed, their story became something of a legend in Silver Creek. Travelers passing through might hear it told in the saloon or whispered between friends at the general store, the tale of a woman's tears and a cowboy's courage, and how a single moment of compassion had changed not only 2 lives but an entire community. And though the telling might change with each retelling, the heart of the story remained the same. In a harsh land where weakness could be fatal, true strength was found not in stoic silence but in the willingness to stand beside another in their moment of need, to share their burden, to honor their pain, and if necessary, to cry with them when no one else would. For Xander and Zara Blackett, that understanding became the foundation of a love that endured through all seasons, a legacy they passed to their children and their children's children, that the measure of a life well lived was not in the tears one avoided, but in those one was willing to shed for the people and principles that mattered most.